Hi everyone, welcome to the new module variables and data types. So in this module you will be introduced to the variables as well as the different data types such as primitives and string, non-primitives. And then we will also talk about the identifier and naming rules in Java. Okay, so let's get started. So variable. The shortest definition of the variable is a container. A container that is used for storing data. Okay, and this container, it will have a unique name, and by using this unique name you will be able to get this container every time when you call the container's name. It is going to return you whatever the data that you stored in that container. So you can imagine this variable as a small box. A box has a name tag on it. And every time when you get that box, whatever the object is stored in that box will be returned to you. Okay? So what's the benefit of using variable then? Why we should be using variable to store the data in our program? So you see, if you have to memorize every single data by yourself, then it's going to create lots of problems for you to complete your program. Because sometimes you may use 5 or 6 data in the program, and sometimes it could be even more, right? And it's not the efficient way to memorize every single data and write your codes. So therefore, what we will do is we will let the variable to memorize it for us, so that you don't have to. If you want to use any of those data, you just need to call the variable name, okay? Because every single variable will have a unique name, and the name will be much more readable and understandable to you as well, okay? And calling the variable name, it is much more simpler and easier than the memorizing the data itself. So every time when we call the variable name, it is going to return us whatever the data that we initially stored into that variable. And yes, after you have the variable, you could also update the value that's stored into the variable. It can also make your codes to be reusable with the different data. Okay, if you use the variable instead of the data itself, next time the same code you can test it with different data just by updating the value that is stored into the variable. Okay, so variables, it can help us to write flexible codes, and also it can improve the reusability and readability of our codes. For that purpose, we should be using variables to store the data that we need to use in our program. And in order to use the variable, first it is important to understand the data types in Java. Why? Because data types, they will determine what kind of value can be stored into the variable. Okay? So in order to store the specific type of variable, you need to use the right data types for the variable. Otherwise, the variable will reject that data that you are trying to store. And in Java, data types are divided into two main categories. One is the primitive data types, and the other one is the non-primitive data types. Okay, so in this module, we will be mainly focusing on the primitive data types. And there are 8 primitive data types in Java. Okay, we have byte, short, int, long, float, double, char, and boolean. Those are the 8 primitive data types. Out of those 8 primitive data types, the 4 of them are used for the integer values. The byte, short, int, long. They are used for the integer values, or known as the whole numbers. So which means if you need to store whole numbers into a variable, then you may use one of those 4 data types. Okay? If you don't use one of those 4 data types, then you probably will not be able to store some integer numbers into the variable if the data type is not matching. Okay? And then the float and double, they are used for the floating numbers. Okay? If the data that you are trying to store into variable is some floating numbers, such as 1.5, 2.5, then you could use those data type to define your variable. Remember, which data type you use to define your variable is extremely important, because If you use the wrong data type, then it's not going to accept the value that you are trying to store into the variable. So when it comes to integer numbers, we will use one of those 4 data types. And when it comes to floating numbers, you do have 2 options, float or double. And then we also have char and boolean. Char is for the characters. It's used for single characters. You can store one single character at a time to a char variable when you use the char as the data type of the variable. And boolean, it is used for the true-false expressions. So you could store true keyword or false keyword to any boolean variable if you use the boolean as the data type of the variable. And you can also store anything that can be evaluated to true or false to the variable that is using this data type, boolean. So those are the 8 primitive data types. Besides those 8 primitive data types, we also have non-primitive data types in Java. Okay. So other than those 8 primitives, rest of them are known as non-primitive data types, such as string, array, or any other classes or any other interfaces can also be a non-primitive data type. Okay. And in this module, yes, you will be introduced to the string variables. We will also do a couple practices with string variables and string concatenation. And as for the other non-primitive data types, you will learn them more in the near future. Okay. And here are the range and the range and memories of those 8 primitive data types that we have. Okay. Remember, using the right primitive data type is important for your variable, because when you declare the variable, you have to make sure that the variable will accept specific type of values. And each of those different type of primitives, they do have different range. Okay. For example, the one that has the smallest range is byte when it comes to the integers. Okay. Byte, short, int, long, they all accept integer values when you use them as data types of the variable. And when you use the byte, when you choose to use the byte as the data type, it accepts the numbers that are from -128 to +127. Meaning that as long as the integer number is within this range, then you could use byte as the data type of your variable. And then the next one that has this larger range compared to byte is the short. Short, the range of the short is from -32,768 to 32,767. So which means as long as the data that you have is integer that is within this range, then you could use short. Okay. But what if the number that I have, the integer number that I have, is larger than this, and I need to store it into the variable? Then you may use int as the data type of your variable. Okay. So int, the range is a lot more larger than short. This is the range of the int. As you can see, it's pretty big. And plus this int is the preferred data type for any integer numbers. Okay. So every time when you enter integer number in your Java codes, by default it will be taken as an int if you don't specify the specific type. And if you have a number that is integer number that is even larger than int, then you may use long. And this is the range of the long. Okay. So those are those first 4 primitives are the ones that you can use for the integers, but you have to pay attention to the range of values. The smallest one is byte and largest one is long. And then next we have float and double. They are for the floating points. Whenever you have floating numbers, you could use those 2 data types. And those 2 data types, they have larger range than the long itself. Okay. Float's range, as you can see, it's larger than long. But this float is designed for the floating numbers, not for integers. Even if you assign integer to a float variable, it will still return you a floating number. For example, if I have 10 that I stored into the float variable, the value of the variable will become 10.0 because the data type I'm using is float. And then what is larger than float is double. Okay, this is the range of double. It has 15 decimal digits. And this double, it is the preferred primitive type when it comes to the floating points. Every time when you enter some floating numbers like 2.5, 3.5, those kind of numbers, by default it is taken as double, unless you specify otherwise. Okay. And then, so those are the numerical primitives from byte to double. Byte, short, int, long are for the integers. Float and double are for the floating points. And then we have this char, which is for the characters, for single character. Okay. But as we stated before, if you look at the ASCII table, every single character has a number that is representing them. Okay. When you use this char, it can accept the character that are within this range from 0 to 65,535. Okay. So even if you assign one of those numbers within this range, it will still return you the character, not the integer, but the character itself. Because char, it is designed for the character. And then lastly, we have the Boolean, which is for the logical true-false expressions. So anything that can be evaluated true-false can be stored into Boolean variable. Okay. And the non-primitive data types, or also known as the reference data types. So the reference data types are not one of those. They are string, array, and multiple classes, because there are also many classes that are that can also be the data type. Okay. When you in the future you will learn how to create custom class, and custom classes can be your data type. And then the interfaces. So the interface is a different term. You will also learn it in the future. When you use the interface, you could still use it as a data type, okay? And then store some different objects into that data type of variable, okay? So for now, we will be mainly focusing on those 8 primitive data types. In our next video, we are going to talk about how we can use those data types to declare the variables and store the data into those variables. Thank you so much, everyone. See you all in the next video.